Imagine for a second that you're building, a state-of-the-art billion-dollar smartphone factory.
Okay, setting the scene. I like it.
Right, so you've navigated all the bureaucracy, you've acquired the land, set up the supply chain, you've got thousands of workers just waiting to
The
go.
ribbon-cutting ceremony is all scheduled.
Exactly. But you can't turn the power on.
Yeah.
You literally, physically cannot start the assembly lines.
Which is every factory owner's worst nightmare.
It is, and the reason why. Because you haven't figured out what to do with the tens of thousands of liters of highly toxic chemical runoff that your production process is going to generate by, like, Tuesday.
Right.
And without a place for that sludge to go, your billion-dollar facility is just an incredibly expensive, totally empty building.
Yeah, it really is the ultimate invisible choke point. I mean, we spend so much time looking at the visible markers of industrial growth across India,
The steel production, the new semiconductor plants.
Exactly, the export numbers. But we completely overlook the shadow infrastructure that's required to make any of it legally or physically possible.
Yeah.
You just cannot have unprecedented industrial expansion without generating actual rivers of complex industrial waste.
And that's exactly what we're looking at today. We are taking a deep dive into the companies that essentially hold the keys to those factories.
The industrial janitors of the 21st century.
I love that phrase, the industrial janitors. And specifically, we're looking at a company called Effwa Infra Research Ltd.
Right. They trade on the NSE under the ticker EFFWA.
Yep. And they operate right in the thick of this environmental engineering and project management space.
So our goal for this deep dive is to really pull back the curtain on the actual mechanics of this. How do you turn toxic industrial sludge into clean, usable water?
Because it's not simple.
Not at all. And we also need to look at the staggering 1.5 to 2.0 lakh crore rupee market they're competing in.
Which is a huge number. We'll get into that.
We will. We'll dissect the specific technological edge they bring to the table. And most importantly, we need to interrogate this really severe financial paradox that's kind of hiding beneath their impressive growth numbers.
Yeah, that financial red flag is fascinating. But let's start with the physical reality of what they actually do.
Okay, let's do it.
Because I was reading through their company profile, and they're described as providing turnkey EPC solutions.
Right.
Now, I know the acronym stands for engineering, procurement, and construction, but what does that actually look like on a Tuesday for their operations team?
Well, it essentially means they own the entire headache from start to finish.
Okay.
If a municipality or, say, a private chemical manufacturer needs a treatment facility, Effwa doesn't just hand them a blueprint and a wish list of parts and say, good luck.
Right. They don't just consult and walk away.
Exactly. Their engineering teams actually design the fluid dynamics of the plant. Then their procurement teams go out and source all the specialized membranes, the heavy-duty pumps, the chemical dosing systems.
All the highly specialized hardware.
Yeah. And then their construction crews physically build the facility on site, and finally they commission it.
Which means what exactly?
It means they run all the tests, they calibrate the software, and they actually prove that the water coming out the other end meets the strict legal parameters before they hand over the keys to the client.
Got it. And I see they build, sewage treatment plants, STPs, and industrial effluent treatment plants, ETPs.
Right, the bread and butter.
But looking at their specialized service list, I keep seeing this word, bioremediation.
Oh, yeah, that's a fascinating area.
Because as someone who isn't a chemical engineer, that just sounds like a sci-fi concept to me.
Yeah.
I mean, are they literally just dumping vats of bacteria into a toxic swamp and hoping for the best?
I mean, the underlying concept isn't entirely far off from that, to be honest.
Wait, really?
Yeah, though the execution is obviously highly controlled. Bioremediation essentially uses specific naturally occurring or engineered microorganisms to break down environmental pollutants.
So, bug power.
Pretty much. Think of certain bacteria that actually metabolize heavy hydrocarbons or, specific chemical solvents.
Hold on. So they eat it, like for energy.
They do. They utilize the contaminants as a food source or an energy source.
That is wild.
It is. But the engineering challenge for a company like Effwa isn't just, finding the right microbe.
Right. I'm sure you can't just order them on Amazon.
Well, the real trick is creating the biological environment. They have to engineer the exact pH, the correct temperature, the precise oxygen levels.
So the bacteria can actually survive.
Exactly. So these microbes can thrive and multiply within a tank of highly toxic industrial effluent. If you can optimize those conditions, the microbes break down these complex toxic molecules into completely inert byproducts.
Like what?
Mostly just water and carbon dioxide.
Wow, so they're using a microscopic workforce to literally dismantle pollution at a molecular level.
That's a great way to put it.
It's incredible. But, as cool as that is, the sources keep pointing back to a totally different technology as their absolute crown jewel. Yes, ZLD.
Right. Something called ZLD, or Zero Liquid Discharge. Now,
Sure.
I read the basic definition, but I need you to translate it into physical reality for me.
Sure.
Do they literally mean not a single drop of water leaves the building?
Not a single drop.
That seems impossible.
So visualize how it works. Picture a sprawling textile dyeing facility.
Okay, lots of colors, lots of water.
Exactly. In a traditional setup, millions of liters of water absorb all those heavy dyes, the salts, the bleaching agents.
Right.
And historically, that water might just go through a really basic settling tank and then be discharged straight into a nearby river, carrying a huge ecological toll.
Which is what we're trying to stop.
Right. So ZLD completely changes the physics of the factory. The wastewater enters a completely closed loop.
Okay, but how do you actually pull the toxic elements out of water that is essentially, at that point, just a thick chemical soup?
It requires a cascading series of pretty brutal physical and chemical processes.
Well, first, there's heavy filtration to remove suspended solids, just getting the big chunks out. Then, reverse osmosis.
Okay, I've heard of that for drinking water.
Right, but on an industrial scale, you use high-pressure pumps to force that dirty water through membranes with pores so microscopic that they allow water molecules to pass through, but trap all the dissolved salts and chemicals.
Okay, so I imagine that leaves you with some clean water on one side, but then an incredibly concentrated sludgy brine on the other side.
Yes. And that brine is the absolute hardest part of the equation. Because you can't just throw that brine in a landfill, right?
It's toxic.
Extremely. So the next stage is thermal evaporation. The factory has to literally boil that brine, turning the remaining water into steam.
Wow.
Which is then captured, cooled, and condensed back into pure water.
Okay, so what's left after you boil all the water away?
The final step is crystallization. What you're left with, after every drop of water is gone, is a completely dry, solid, heavily concentrated cake of toxic salts and chemicals.
A toxic cake.
Basically, yeah.
I was reading through their engineering notes in the sources, and honestly, the only thing I could compare this to is the water recycling system on an International Space Station.
That's actually a really good analogy.
Right? Where every single drop of moisture, sweat, breath, literally everything is captured, scrubbed, and reused because they're in a closed environment.
Exactly.
But EFFWA is taking that fragile closed-loop space technology and scaling it up to handle millions of liters inside a heavy-duty, dirty chemical plant on Earth.
And the physical forces involved are just immense. I mean, boiling millions of liters of water requires staggering amounts of energy.
Oh, I bet.
And the internal pressures in those reverse osmosis systems, they can literally blow out steel pipes if they're mismanaged. Achieving true ZLD is an incredibly hostile engineering environment.
So if the engineering is that intense and presumably that expensive to run, who is eagerly writing the checks for these systems?
Well, the client base is highly diversified across basically anyone who uses water as a core production input. On the private side, you're looking at more than 20 distinct industries. We're talking leather tanneries, pharmaceutical manufacturing, petrochemical refineries, steel mills, and even large-scale dairy and food processing plants.
Basically, any industry that touches a liquid.
Pretty much, yeah. And then you have the public sector side as well. Municipalities that are attempting to upgrade their city-scale sewage treatment to handle rapid urbanization, plus these huge public sector undertakings.
The PSUs.
Right.
Which brings up a bigger question for me. Because understanding the tech is one thing, but looking at the industry projections in these sources, the scale of what's happening is just staggering.
The market size, you mean?
Yeah. We're talking about an estimated total addressable market, the TAM of 1.5 to 2.0 lakh crore rupees annually for the 2025 to 2026 period.
It's an enormous figure.
How does a number that large even break down? Where's all that money going?
Well, the sheer volume of water required by a nation of over 1 billion people that is rapidly industrializing kind of dictates those numbers. Water and wastewater treatment infrastructure is the largest chunk. That's estimated between 70,000 to 80,000 crore rupees.
Okay.
Then you have the solid and hazardous waste management segment at roughly 30,000 to 35,000 crore rupees.
Got it.
And the remainder, which is about 20,000 to 25,000 crore, goes to the consultancy, EPC, and integrated project management fees. That's what companies like Effwa actually charge to put the whole puzzle together.
Okay, so a 2.0 lakh crore rupee pie sounds fantastic for anyone in the business.
Absolutely.
But usually in a market that size, you have legacy conglomerates who have already locked down all the lucrative contracts. They own the space.
Right, the big legacy players.
But the data in the deep dive sources shows something really surprising. Only 35 to 40% of this market is currently being served.
Which is a huge gap.
Yeah, there is a vast open territory of 9,000 to 12,000 crore rupees that remains completely unserved. So who is sitting in that unserved gap?
It's mainly two primary demographics. First, you have your Tier 3 and Tier 4 municipalities.
The smaller cities.
Exactly. The major metropolitan areas, Mumbai, Delhi, Bangalore, they've had legacy waste infrastructure for a while. However strained it might be, it exists.
Right, they at least have pipes in the ground.
But as these smaller cities expand into new industrial hubs, their municipal budgets and their planning departments are suddenly being forced to build modern, large-scale sewage treatment plants for the very first time.
They're starting from scratch. Okay, and what's the second demographic in that unserved gap?
The small to medium enterprises, the SMEs.
Okay, the smaller factories.
Right. For decades, major multinational conglomerates operating in India have had the capital and the public scrutiny requiring them to build compliance infrastructure.
Because everyone is watching them.
Exactly. But the thousands of smaller factories, the mid-tier chemical suppliers, the little textile units, they often operated under the radar.
Which probably means they were just discharging straight into the environment, right? Into a local stream or something.
Unfortunately, yes, in many cases.
So why the sudden frantic rush from these smaller players to buy these multi-million rupee water treatment systems? I highly doubt it's a spontaneous awakening of corporate environmental consciousness.
Oh, it's definitely not out of the goodness of their hearts. It is entirely driven by an inescapable regulatory net that is just pulling tighter and tighter every single year.
The government is stepping in.
Aggressively. The Central Pollution Control Board, the CPCB, has dramatically escalated its mandates. For instance, we can look at the National Water Policy of 2024.
What does that do?
It explicitly requires 100% recycling in high-risk, water-stressed zones. If your factory sits in one of those zones, ZLD is no longer a suggestion. It is a strict condition of your operating license.
Wow, so you either do it or you get shut down.
Exactly.
And there's also the EPR framework mentioned in the notes. Extended producer responsibility. I've heard this term thrown around a lot lately.
Yeah, EPR is a huge driver. It essentially shifts the physical and financial burden of waste management back onto the manufacturer.
Meaning what?
Meaning, if you produce electronics or complex plastics, you are now legally responsible for the entire life cycle of that waste. You can't just manufacture the product and wash your hands of the byproduct.
It tracks the waste back to you.
Yeah.
I also want to bring in the urbanization angle here, because it feels relevant.
Oh, very relevant.
India is adding roughly 10 million people to its urban areas every single year.
It's a staggering migration.
And to keep those cities from basically collapsing under their own weight, the government launched the Jal Jeevan mission, supported by an allocation of 2.1 lakh crore rupees.
Right.
Now, that's primarily for piping clean drinking water into homes, but every liter of clean water piped in eventually becomes a liter of sewage that has to be treated, right?
Exactly. The input completely necessitates the output infrastructure. You can't have one without the other.
And layered on top of all this demographic pressure is the push for industrial formalization.
Which brings us to the PLI schemes.
Right, the production-linked incentives. These are those massive subsidies designed to turn India into a global manufacturing hub, right? Bringing in the semiconductor plants, the EV battery manufacturers.
Yep. But here's the catch with those PLI subsidies. They come with incredibly strict conditions. You only get the financial incentives if you maintain rigorous on-site environmental compliance.
Ah, so there's strings attached to the money.
Thick strings. The logic is simple. The state will not subsidize the poisoning of its own groundwater. If you want the government's money, your factory must meet global environmental standards from day one.
Okay, I have to challenge this premise, though.
Go for it.
Because a 1.5 lakh crore rupee market driven by strict laws looks absolutely bulletproof on a
A
spreadsheet.
paper, yeah.
But the reality of emerging markets is that a law is really only as powerful as the inspector enforcing it.
That's fair.
If local enforcement slips, or if inspectors are underfunded, or even if political priorities shift and they decide to look the other way just to protect local jobs, doesn't this entire unserved demand just evaporate overnight?
You're right that the vulnerability of regulatory markets is always enforcement. And historically, especially in smaller industrial pockets, compliance was, let's say, porous.
Porous is a polite word for it.
It is. But the architecture of enforcement has fundamentally changed. We are moving away from relying on a single human inspector visiting a plant once a year with a clipboard.
Okay, so what's replacing the guy with the clipboard?
The pollution control boards are increasingly mandating real-time digital monitoring,
You mean putting sensors directly into the factories?
literally inside the pipes. They install IoT sensors on the primary discharge pipes of these factories.
Wow.
And those sensors measure pH levels, chemical oxygen demand, total suspended solids, and they beam that data continuously to a centralized government dashboard.
So they can see it in real time.
Right. And if the effluent exceeds legal limits, the dashboard flags it automatically. It completely removes the human element of localized bribery or, just looking the other way.
I see.
Because bypassing a digital sensor linked directly to a state grid is a much, much higher risk proposition for a factory owner than dodging an underpaid inspector.
That makes total sense.
Oh.
Okay, assuming the digital enforcement holds, we have an enormous mandated market, and literally every construction and engineering firm in the country is going to be bidding for these contracts.
Oh, yeah, it's a gold rush.
So how does EFFWA, which is a relatively specialized player, actually win bids against legacy infrastructure giants? What is their specific advantage?
Well, this brings us back to their focus on the Zero Liquid Discharge technology we talked about earlier, but specifically how they package it.
How do you package an industrial water plant?
Their defining competitive edge, their moat, is their capability to build modular, low-footprint ZLD systems.
Let's focus on that phrase, low footprint. Why is physical space the deciding factor in winning a 50 crore rupee contract?
You have to picture the geography of a typical Indian industrial estate. These zones were plotted out decades ago. Land is incredibly scarce, and real estate is exorbitantly expensive. Now, a traditional wastewater treatment plant requires an enormous footprint.
Because it's huge.
Yeah, you have to excavate acres of land just to pour concrete for giant open-air aeration basins and primary settling tanks.
And if I'm a factory owner, every square meter of my land needs to generate revenue for me. I want to build a new assembly line, not a massive concrete swimming pool for my toxic runoff.
Exactly. And often they simply don't even have the adjacent land available to buy, even if they wanted to. The factory is totally boxed in by other factories.
Right, there's nowhere to expand.
So EFFWA solves this geographic nightmare. Instead of taking 6 months to pour custom concrete tanks on site, they build prefabricated, skid-mounted modules in their own facilities.
Like industrial Lego blocks.
That is exactly what they are. They load these dense, highly engineered modules onto standard shipping skids, transport them to the factory, and then use cranes to just drop them into a fraction of the physical space a traditional plant would require.
That is clever.
They stack the technology vertically, or they optimize the fluid pathways to drastically reduce the real estate penalty the factory owner has to pay.
And looking at their stock performance, the market clearly sees the value in that specific capability.
Oh, the market loves it.
EFFWA's market cap has grown to 814.43 crore rupees. That is a 48% increase in just 1 year.
Yeah.
And over the last 6 months alone, the stock jumped nearly 52%. The sources also note they're now qualifying to bid as a solo entity on single projects worth over 400 crore rupees.
Which is a huge deal. Qualifying for projects of that magnitude without having to enter into a joint venture with a larger firm is a really critical threshold for them.
Because it proves they can handle it alone.
Exactly. It signals that both the government and private clients trust their balance sheet and their technical execution at a really significant scale.
Okay, but the sources also highlight a very real fragility to this success.
They do.
They have this excellent space-saving modular technology, but it seems to be their only real defense. They lack what business strategists would call a durable moat.
Right.
They don't have an Apple-like ecosystem that traps a customer once they buy in. They're the absolute cheapest option, so they can't win on cost leadership alone.
Yeah.
And in the B2B infrastructure world, brand loyalty is notoriously fickle anyway.
Yeah, their positioning is highly, highly concentrated on this one technical feature. Think of it like a software startup that develops one incredibly innovative feature, say, a new way to edit photos.
Right.
It's wildly popular, but it's just a feature. It's not an entire platform. The moment a tech giant like Apple or Google reverse engineers that feature and integrates it into their default operating system, the startup's entire value proposition just vanishes.
Right. So if a multinational infrastructure conglomerate decides to aggressively enter the Indian market with a slightly more efficient, slightly cheaper skid-mounted ZLD module, EFFWA's unique selling proposition is suddenly under severe threat.
Absolutely. The lack of secondary differentiators leaves them totally exposed to pure technological leapfrogging.
Which is scary.
It is, and that vulnerability in their market positioning is really just the precursor to a much more profound vulnerability when we look at their internal financial engine.
Okay, which is where things get truly complicated.
Yeah.
Let's look at the financial statements from the deep dive. On paper, at first glance, the mission is roaring.
What's great on paper.
Revenue jumped from 104.37 crore rupees in FY22 to 145.16 crore rupees in FY24.
Solid growth.
And their order book, the contracts they've actually won and are currently executing, sits at a robust 526.25 crore rupees.
Their efficiency metrics are also really striking for the EPC sector. They are generating a 30.5% return on equity, or ROE,
Wow.
and a 33.9% return on capital employed, ROCE. In an industry defined by heavy equipment and really slow builds, generating over 30% return on the capital you deploy indicates highly, highly disciplined project execution.
I noticed they achieve those returns through a very specific revenue mix.
Yeah, how they make their money.
The heavy lifting, the actual EPC contracts where they build the municipal sewage plants, it provides the sheer volume of revenue.
Right, the top line.
But the margin expansion, the actual thick profits, comes from selling that proprietary ZLD technology and from their upfront engineering consultancy.
Because consultancy is essentially the ideal business model. You are monetizing your intellectual property and your engineering brainpower.
It's just smart people at desks.
Exactly. It requires almost zero heavy capital investment, so the gross margins on that segment are significantly higher than the physical construction side where you're buying cement and steel.
Okay, but, and this is the pivot point of the entire deep dive, I think, we have to talk about what happens after they finish the engineering and actually build the plant.
The catch.
We have to talk about the catch. The sources highlight a metric called debtor days, and the number for EFFWA is 232 days.
232 days.
I really need to contextualize this for anyone listening. Imagine you are a highly successful freelance graphic designer, okay? You have an incredible portfolio, and you just signed 50 lakh rupees in new contracts with major corporations.
You're popping champagne.
Right. On paper, you are having the best financial year of your life. But when you go to the grocery store on a Tuesday, your debit card is declined. You have absolutely 0 rupees in your checking account to buy milk.
Because you haven't been paid.
Why? Because the corporations you did the work for have a policy of not paying their invoices for 8 months.
That analogy perfectly captures the infrastructure paradox. A company can be wildly, undeniably profitable on an income statement while simultaneously suffocating from a severe lack of liquid cash.
And the data supports this paradox completely. EFFWA's overall working capital days, the time it takes to buy raw materials, build a plant, and eventually get the cash back in hand, has stretched from 93.5 days to 141 days.
That's a huge jump.
And the statistic that really jumped off the page for me, 74% of their earnings are non-cash.
It's wild.
How does a construction company even operate when 3/4 of its profits are just numbers on a spreadsheet? Let's walk through a hypothetical transaction to understand this accounting reality.
Okay, let's say EFFWA wins a 50 crore rupee contract to build a municipal sewage plant. The project is going to take 2 years to build.
Okay, 2 years.
Under standard accounting rules, specifically something called percentage of completion accounting, EFFWA doesn't wait 2 years to report that revenue.
Right.
If they build 80% of the plant in year 1, they report 80% of the revenue. So let's say 40 crore rupees. And they record the corresponding profit on their income statement.
And the stock market sees the growth and cheers.
Exactly.
But the municipality hasn't actually given them 40 crore rupees in cash yet.
Far from it. In government contracting, the physical completion of a milestone is just the beginning of a incredibly torturous bureaucratic journey.
Bureaucracy at its finest.
Yeah, the site engineer has to sign off, then the regional chief engineer reviews it, then it goes to the municipal finance department for audit.
It just keeps going up the chain.
And then they have to wait for the state government to release the actual budget allocation down to the municipality.
So the invoice just sits on a desk in a government office for 232 days.
While EFFWA has already reported the profit to its shareholders, and crucially, has to pay taxes on that reported profit.
Oh, wait. They are paying real cash taxes on theoretical money they haven't even received yet.
Yes, they are.
And during those 232 days, they still have to meet payroll for hundreds of engineers. They still have to buy the steel and the specialized reverse osmosis membranes for their next project.
This is the working capital trap. To bridge that massive 8-month gap, companies typically have to rely on short-term debt, drawing down on working capital loans from banks.
Which isn't free.
Not at all. The interest payments on those loans slowly eat away at the very profit margins they worked so hard to achieve in the first place.
It seems like a completely unsustainable loop. How is management planning to survive this cash flow bottleneck while simultaneously trying to scale up and capture that 1.5 lakh crore rupee market?
Well, management is acutely aware of the trap, and they are attempting a strategic pivot to change the underlying physics of their cash flow.
Okay, what's the pivot?
The primary vector for this is aggressively pursuing O&M contracts, operations, and maintenance.
Okay, this makes perfect sense because building the plant is a huge, lumpy payday that takes forever to collect.
Exactly. EPC construction revenue is highly volatile. You win a 400 crore rupee project, you build it, you eventually get paid, and then that revenue stream just falls to zero.
You have to start all over again.
You have to constantly hunt for the next mammoth contract just to maintain your baseline. But by securing the operations and maintenance contract for the facility they just finished building, they fundamentally alter their financial profile.
They basically transform a one-off construction job into an ongoing subscription model, like software.
Basically, yeah. They get paid a predictable recurring monthly fee to operate the software, maintain the pumps, supply the chemicals, and guarantee the effluent meets legal standards.
Which is reliable cash.
It provides a steady, reliable pulse of liquidity that smooths out the chaotic working capital swings of the construction side.
That's smart. The sources also detail a push toward premiumization and internal digital overhaul.
Right.
They're currently rolling out a 3-year ERP enterprise resource planning roadmap to digitize their procurement and project management. And management states they are focusing on quality over quantity when it comes to bidding on new projects.
And you have to read between the lines there. Quality over quantity in the EPC world is code for walking away from the bottom feeders.
What do you mean?
They're recognizing that winning a generic, low-tech municipal sewage contract is just a race to the bottom on price, and those are the exact clients most likely to delay payment for a year.
Ah, so they want better clients.
Exactly. They want to focus exclusively on highly complex, specialized ZLD projects for blue-chip private clients or really well-funded PSUs, clients where they can dictate favorable payment terms and protect their gross margins, which are currently hovering around a very healthy 21.99%.
They are also expanding their geographic footprint to chase these premium clients.
Yeah.
They aren't just sitting in one state, they're pushing aggressively into the major industrial corridors of Tamil Nadu, Gujarat, and Maharashtra.
Right.
And the notes mention they're utilizing a network of over 900 locations to execute this expansion.
And their status as a publicly listed company is actually a weapon in this expansion.
How so?
Well, the environmental engineering sector in India has historically been very fragmented, filled with small, localized, informal players.
Like mom-and-pop operations.
Right. But as the National Green Tribunal, the NGT, becomes increasingly draconian in enforcing standards, the compliance requirements just become way too technically complex for a small local contractor to handle.
So the mom-and-pop waste management shops just get squeezed out because they can't engineer a skid-mounted ZLD system. They don't have the tech.
Exactly. And EFFWA, armed with the credibility and the capital access of a listed entity, is perfectly positioned to absorb that orphan market share and consolidate the industry.
Okay, so the growth thesis is compelling. Pivot to recurring revenue, digitize the back office, target high-margin private clients, and eat the informal competition.
It's a solid playbook.
But as an analyst, you always have to look for the failure points. Let's examine the leadership, the governance structure, and the downside risks that could break this entire narrative.
Okay, let's look at the leadership first. The CEO is Varsha Kamal. Now, as of mid-2026, her tenure in the top leadership role is relatively brief, sitting at about 1.6 years.
Okay, pretty fresh.
However, she holds a substantial 37.32% ownership stake in the company.
So the financial alignment is definitely there. Her personal wealth is directly tied to the company's performance.
Very much so.
But the sources flag some governance metrics that require a second look. It is a family-led board of directors. The average tenure across the board is also quite short, matching the CEO at around 1.6 years. And there is a glaring financial decision that really stands out. Despite reporting consecutive years of strong profitability and high returns on equity, the company has declared zero dividends. They return no cash to shareholders.
And when you synthesize those data points, a family-dominated board with short tenure, an enormous pile of unpaid receivables, and an absolute refusal to distribute cash dividends, despite claiming record profits, it paints a picture of a company that is hoarding every single rupee just to survive its own working capital cycle.
It's a bit of a red flag.
It warrants intense scrutiny from any potential partner or investor, for sure.
Which leads us to the first massive downside risk: regulatory and financial scrutiny. We talked about the 232-day debtor days. What happens if the music stops?
The dreaded write-down.
Right, what happens if an external auditor looks at their books and decides those numbers aren't just delayed, but dead?
The worst-case scenario in EPC accounting is exactly that write-down. The sources estimate that trade receivables constitute a staggering 25% of EFFWA's entire balance sheet.
A quarter of the company.
Yeah. Let's say an auditor examines invoices from a municipal project that are now, 14 months past due. And the auditor determines that the municipality simply lacks the funds and will never pay.
The auditor forces EFFWA to reclassify that revenue as bad debt.
Exactly. And the moment they write down a significant portion of that 25%, the on-paper profits we discussed earlier instantly vanish.
Just evaporate.
The earnings collapse, the equity takes a huge hit, and the market reaction would be brutal.
Risk number 2 is input cost volatility. EFFWA predominantly operates on fixed-price contracts, right?
Right.
So they agree to build a state-of-the-art ZLD plant for a chemical manufacturer for, let's say, 80 crore rupees. And the engineering and construction might take 18 months.
And within that 18-month window, the macroeconomic environment can shift violently.
Oh, absolutely.
The price of specialized steel alloys needed for the reverse osmosis tanks could spike due to global supply chain disruptions.
Or a war breaks out.
Exactly. The cost of the specific chemical polymers they use for water treatment could surge by 15% out of nowhere.
And because the contract price is locked in at 80 crore rupees, EFFWA has no mechanism to pass those increased costs onto the client.
None.
They have to absorb the blow entirely themselves. With gross margins at 21.99%, a sudden 15% spike in raw materials could wipe out their entire profit margin on a 2-year project in a matter of weeks. They are highly leveraged to the unpredictability of global commodities.
And the third major risk is cyclicality.
Right.
It's so easy to look at the environmental mandates and assume this is a secular, unstoppable growth trend.
Because the environment is always a priority.
You'd think. But EFFWA is still fundamentally an infrastructure company, and infrastructure is tied to the broader economic cycle.
A huge portion of their TAM is reliant on municipal budgets and central government allocations like that Jal Jeevan mission we talked about.
Exactly. If the broader economy enters a recession, or if tax revenues fall short, the government will inevitably slash infrastructure spending to balance the budget.
It's the first thing to get cut.
Always. Municipalities will freeze their capital expenditure. They will stop putting out tenders for new sewage plants. And crucially, they will delay payments on the ones currently being built.
Which makes the 232-day problem even worse.
Exactly. EFFWA's order book could stall abruptly.
So, as someone listening to this deep dive, trying to understand the reality of India's industrial landscape, you are really faced with a phenomenal tension.
It's a tightrope walk.
I want you to weigh this balance. On one side, you have the undeniable structural gravity of national environmental law.
It's not going away.
Right. The government is actively forcing thousands of industries to clean up, and EFFWA holds the exact space-saving, high-tech modular key to unlock that compliance.
But on the other side of the scale, you have the brutal reality of the 232-day wait for cash. The real question is whether the sheer velocity of the market demand can propel them forward fast enough to outrun their own cash flow bottlenecks.
It is the perfect case study. Because whether you are focused on the mechanics of industrial expansion, the terrifying global reality of water scarcity, or just the granular nuts and bolts of how civic infrastructure is actually funded and built, EFFWA demonstrates exactly how difficult, complex, and intensely capital-heavy it is to actually execute the idea of cleaning up the planet.
We often mandate the outcome, a clean river, zero toxic discharge, without fully comprehending the immense physical and financial machinery required to actually achieve it.
It's easy to write a law. It's hard to build the plant. And that leads me to a final thought I want to leave you with today. We are so conditioned to view environmental cleanup through a lens of moral imperative,
Saving the ecosystems, protecting the groundwater.
Exactly. But as highly advanced systems like Zero Liquid Discharge transition from being theoretical best practices to strict, inescapable legal mandates, the paradigm shifts entirely.
It becomes a business reality.
Clean water isn't just a human right or an environmental goal anymore. It is rapidly becoming the single most expensive, complex line item on an industrial balance sheet.
Wow.
Achieving that zero discharge perfection is staggering in its cost.
And the burden of that cost cannot simply vanish into thin air.
It has to go somewhere.
Yeah.
So the ultimate question is, who is actually going to pay for it? When the factory is forced to spend 50 crore rupees on a water treatment plant just to keep its doors open, do they absorb that cost and crush their own profit margins?
Unlikely.
Does the government subsidize the compliance with your tax rupees to keep manufacturing jobs from fleeing the country?
Maybe.
Or does the factory simply pass the cost down the line, meaning that you, the consumer, are ultimately paying a hidden environmental premium for every single smartphone, every pharmaceutical pill, and every drop of milk you buy, just to ensure the industrial janitors have enough cash to keep mopping up the sludge?